And good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. Let's do it in a different order this time. Welcome to the Groovy podcast, wherever around the world you are. My name is Ken Kousen, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I'm joined by my good friend. That was your cue.
And who is freezing? There we go. Baruch Sadogursky, J Frog, Sunnyvale, California. Hey, hey.
Usually we don't demonstrate our low, processing skills or values here quite so early in the podcast. Usually we actually start off pretty well, and it isn't until later that people start realizing there are no real production values associated with this thing, which reminds me, from what I understand, looking at your Twitter feed, you actually gave a talk recently about podcasts, and you use this podcast as evidence of the fact that you actually know something about podcasting. What in the world was that all about?
Yeah. So one of my favorite conferences, along with, of course, GradeConf and other Groovy conferences on the developer relations topic, because this is what I do.
So,
and
sorry, we hit
one of those.
We hit some lag there. What was the name of the conference?
I didn't get to the name yet.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's why. Today is a new low.
It's going to be a good day. Yeah, go ahead.
And so last week, last week, I don't know. I don't remember. I think it was this week. Yeah, this week. We had a conference which is called DevExCon, for Developer Experience Conference, in San Francisco, organized by Matthew and Tamao. And that was about developer relations, and I managed to sneak in and give a talk about podcasting, and as you said, should it be how not to podcast based on what we are doing? But actually, I used 3 different podcasts as examples, 3 podcasts that I participate in actively. Our Russian geek Razbor Polotov as an example for some traits. The Groovy podcast is an example of others, and then the DevRel Radio as an example of relevant content for DevRel conference. I actually had 2 people in the audience who actually are listeners of Groovy podcast.
I was really
surprised. Wow. Yes, that's what I said.
Room.
In the same room. Well, although it was like 200 people, so it was kind of 1%, but still, I was really surprised to see someone who knows. So we are popular. And the way I structured it is that for every topic that I spoke about podcasting, for example, preparing the show notes or planning ahead, and then the software, and then the post-production and all that, I showed 3 examples on a scale from low key to high end. And Groovy podcast wasn't the low key on all 3 of them.
No.
So, for example, of course not. So, for example, Groovy podcast is much more prepared than Razbor Polotov, because there we don't have any show notes in advance. We just jump on a call, speak what we want to speak for 2 hours, and then build the show notes out of it. So, for example, for preparation, the Groovy podcast was rated much higher, right? And but I did speak at Google Hangouts. And by the way, look at your microphone now. Definitely, yes. So we definitely moved along with the equipment from the low key to the mid level, which I personally recommend. So I think no complaints. Groovy podcast did a very good service for me, being my example in the talk. I hope I did good service for Groovy podcast as well, and we will see the download numbers and the engagement numbers, and let's see if it was useful for the podcast as the podcast was useful for me.
Well, if we see the number of listeners skyrocket, we'll know what it was. I did, as you say, I finally broke down and got a decent microphone. I've been teaching so many online classes at Safari Books Online that I figured it was worth it to actually invest in a real microphone. It looks apparently like I got the one that you have or something like that.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
Rode
that's
microphone. Yeah, actually,
yes, it's a Rode podcaster.
yeah. To be
It's my yeah. Go
to
ahead.
be clear about that, that was Trisha G that triggered that. I mean, when we talked to her on the podcast last month, I noticed that she was using this excellent mic with a boom and everything. So I just went, okay, it's time. And I asked her, and she told me that Hadi Hariri at JetBrains had said, oh, yeah, this is the one to get. And he gave her a link, and she gave me the link. And I went, yeah, okay, whatever. So my son gave me a hard time.
You realize that I have this microphone in front of your face here now.
I had no idea. Yeah, go figure. I should have asked you.
And then Trisha, right? I've been advertising it for a year, and then Trisha convinced you.
Oh well, I assume that whatever you're doing is far too high end for me to handle. You know.
Yeah.
But Trisha,
that's a nice try to get out of it. Not bad. But back to the microphone, I have to say that was my recommendation in the talk as well, and that's actually the golden, like the gold of the equipment. It's gold standard. It's not very expensive. It's around $200, and it provides amazing quality. Much better. Yeah.
That was actually what happened. Is I was listening to the podcast when I talked to Trisha, and she sounded so much better than I did. And it wasn't just because of her absolutely charming English accent. It was, I mean, the quality of the sound was so much better. Then I started to feel embarrassed. So yeah, it was time. So I actually, when you're listening to me now, I actually more or less sound like this, believe it or not. So I should drop my voice an octave, shouldn't I? You know.
So yeah, good purchase. I'm still shocked that you didn't affiliate it to me, but that's okay.
Well, look, I grew the beard like you. Isn't that enough? You know, I'm trying to imitate you that way.
No complaints. No complaints. I will make sure to set you up with the hat. But you need to shave first.
Well, then I got to talk to you about headphones, I suppose, at some point. Oh, okay.
So yeah, headphones. Okay, so at least you will give me the headphones. Yeah. So getting back to the microphone and the values of it, the biggest value of having good microphone is that we do not need to do any post production. We never did it anyway, but now we won't do it, and we actually sound decent. That's the difference.
Okay. Well, let's. I'm sure as fascinating as this topic is, let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about: news and views from the Groovy ecosystem. You know,
we have some very, very big ones.
Well, of course, what happened last week, the big deal was is that GreatConf happened in Copenhagen. And as is usual at GreatConf, there were a series of announcements and releases that went along with that. So we'll get back to GreatConf in a minute. But one of the things that was announced at the conference, of course, is the long-awaited version 2.5.0 of Groovy.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
yay, that's right. That gets an applause. Absolutely.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I put a link to the release notes in there. Now, we've known about this coming for a while. We've talked about the macro support that was originally from Sergey Egorov, good old B-side up. There's a whole bunch in the notes about the macro support. There's a bunch of new AST transforms, again, like map constructor and name param and auto implement and all kinds of things like that. Various improvements in AST transforms. One of the small things that changed that I did not expect, I had no idea was coming, is there's JUnit 5 support now. Did you see that one?
Yeah, no, I didn't, because frankly, having Spock, who even cares about JUnit support?
Well, I keep an eye out on that, and when I'm in the Java world and I can't use Spock, then I've been a JUnit user forever, like everybody. And I recently spent several days really getting to know JUnit 5. You know, I was going to teach a training class on Safari on JUnit 5, and that gave me the excuse I needed to dig into it. By the way, I am very impressed. I mean, they did an extraordinarily good job designing it, and the documentation is excellent, and the examples all work. I still like Spock better. I still think some of the things they did are more cleanly and easily done in Spock. I mean, data tables, nothing compares to that. But still, I am very impressed with the improvement of JUnit 5 over JUnit 4. And now it's nice to know that you can actually put a JUnit 5 test right in the Groovy console, and it'll run directly. That's
Yeah,
very
no,
impressive.
absolutely. There been very good progress, and they caught up at least with test and G completely. Right, there is no. I mean, they are not less than test and G at the moment, but still we have Spock. So
Yeah, well, absolutely. But it's nice that Groovy is supporting that effort now. So that's all good. There was some improvements to CLI Builder, apparently supporting annotation, style definitions. I haven't tried that out. There's a few breaking changes, but in general, it's not a huge variation over Groovy 2.4. I mean, there's mostly the variations are the macro stuff that's really for people who write AST transforms. We're now waiting for Groovy 3. Now, as a comment on that, by the way, I did put a link to where's the video? The video that Paul King did at OCI. He spent an hour talking about the video is called Groovy 2.5 Roadmap.
yeah, it's in the show notes. It's
Right.
item number 565.
Whatever.
Something.
And I know he talks about 3.0 as well, but all the comment is simply that it'll be out at, by the end of the year. There's no better. I mean, I didn't watch the whole thing on that, but that's what he said in the past.
Yeah, and I think we got the same date from Guillaume and Cedric when we spoke at Devox Friends. So yeah, it's we all expect it by the end of the year. Yeah, all parties involved. We
Paul
still
King.
have
Oh, go
we
ahead.
still have to speak with Dr. King about the open issues of the future support of Groovy with newer Java versions. I understand that he's cruising someone in the Baltics now.
Oh yeah.
So
I mean,
we
I contacted him, I sent him an email and I was offering to try to do some sort of interview during GreatConf, figuring that's a much easier time zone to deal with for us than being on the other side of the planet. But he, typical, he was very busy during the conference, and then he and his wife are really, really good at doing the tourist thing. It's like, so is Andres Almire, and Ishel Ruiz. They do tourist stuff really well. Well, yeah, Paul and his wife are currently on a cruise a 10-day cruise in the Baltic, going from Oslo to St. Petersburg and a bunch of towns cities in between. It must be incredible. I hope to see more pictures.
Yeah, me too. That's a good cruise, and now it's the time to do it. End of June, sorry, when the days are long, so that should be a lot of fun.
We will get him on the podcast, though. We'll get
yeah. So we need to do that. We have this depth, I think, for our listeners, the whole 5 of them. We will make it happen.
So, at any rate, that was the Groovy 2.5.0 release was at GreatConf. The other thing that was released on stage at GreatConf, leave it to El Grovissimo. Oh, wait a minute, whoever that is. Leave it to Andres Almire to.
We don't know. We don't know who El Grovissimo is.
There's no way to know. But leave it to Andres Almire to make a dramatic announcement during a presentation. Griffon, good old Griffon, 2.15.0 is also now officially released.
I think it's now a tradition. I don't think that's the first time he releases Griffon on stage. I think he wants to make a tradition out of it, which is very nice tradition, if you ask me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good thing. So, at any rate, that's available now. The other product that came out, not associated with GreatConf, but around the same time, Gradle 4.8 has now been released. You can grab any of these on SDK Manager, of course. I still want to call it SDK Manager rather than SDK Man. Although I guess, did you notice that Marco, right? Marco Vermeulen?
Marco Vermeulen, yep.
Yeah, he redid the website. So it's certainly a lot more mobile friendly. And it's got, I mean, you don't normally need the website because, SDK Man is installed locally and does everything it does without going through the website itself. But it's nice that it's all been revamped and the docs are all there and everything. That looks nice.
I don't think I ever saw the website, so maybe now it's a good time.
Yeah, well, there's actually good documentation there. Of course, the reason I use SDK Man recently, other than upgrading to Gradle 4.8, Gradle 4.8, by the way, is another one of those, relatively speaking, incremental improvements. the release notes are in the docs. They talk about dependency locking and assigning plugin. They finally, actually, the one thing that I think may affect people's lives in Gradle 4.8 is that the Maven Publish plugin is now officially released. There's also an Ivy Publish plugin. I don't know how many people use that, but the issue I've had with Gradle for years, when I talk about it in presentations or whatever, is how do I publish artifacts to Maven or Gradle repos? And this Maven Publish plugin is what do they call it? Dedicated type safe DSL to customize the POM generated as part of a Maven publication. That's now considered stable, and use of the Maven plugin is now discouraged and will eventually be deprecated.
Yeah, those are great news. This plugin was in the incubating stages for years. It made it hard for us, for example, because we had to support both of them. So we for one definitely welcome this release. The unpublish, I just give it some. I will defend it for a second. Has nothing to do with ant itself. The question of how the metadata about artifact is presented. Maven publish generates POM file. Unpublish generates IVXML. IVXML is a decent metadata format. It actually has much more flexibility and options than POM. And if an organization is just decide to use AntXML as their metadata and not POM XML, it's nothing wrong with that. From Gradle perspective, it really doesn't matter. It's just the question of which file, which metadata file the publishing process will generate and omit.
Well, I leave that to you. That's your business. You know much more about that stuff than I do. I just am aware of it now, and I imagine they're going to update their training materials and documentation to recommend the usage of that plugin from now on. Both the Maven and the Ivy published one.
Yeah, so and Ivy, obviously, all the metadata is Ivy, but yeah.
I know what you were excited about is that Gradle 4.8 now includes the 0.17.5 of the Kotlin DSL as well.
Absolutely, yes, and I'm following by asking people who are suicidal enough to try it how it is, and so far the reaction was it doesn't work. So yeah, I'm keep looking for getting a version that you can actually do something with.
This is actually going to be something that we're going to have to watch over the coming months, because Gradle as a company seems to be staking a lot. Well, let me say it this way. My impression, now again, this is completely my own opinion. I haven't talked to anybody about this stuff or anything, even though I have done some contract work for Gradle in the past and I teach their intro Gradle class. I'm not revealing any insider information. I'm being very careful not to do that. My sense is, while the past few years they have been addressing performance issues largely driven by a lot of their major clients, the people like Netflix and stuff, I think they feel they have achieved the best performance metrics they can get, or something reasonable. And now they feel that what's holding them back, if anything, is the usability issue. The problem that people who are not hardcore developers sometimes have a difficult time figuring out what to do in Gradle, and that they want to fix that. And my concern, fear, whatever, is that they have staked a lot on the idea of IDE integration with a Kotlin DSL as a way to strongly address and maybe even fix that problem. I don't honestly know how that's going to go. I mean, until we get 1.0 of the Kotlin DSL, I don't really want to make any assessments of it. When people say it's got problems or it's broken or whatever, I mean, well, I don't expect anything pre-1 to be all that fantastic, you know.
I agree. It's not fair to judge until it is released. There are a lot of early adopters that try and they keep trying because they are excited about Kotlin, and nothing wrong with that, obviously. And if what you are saying is right, and this is their focus now, there is definitely opportunity for them to make it work. From what I know, there is one developer that works on it, and it's kind of it's now definitely not their main focus. I bet if they switch all their engineering or significant engineering effort to it, they will do a great job, unless there are some problems in Kotlin itself that will prevent it. But frankly, I have no idea.
Well, I'm worried that they're hoping too much out of this. I'm worried that it's not going to provide the ease of use that they're hoping for. I don't have any evidence to back that up. I hope it does well. I really do. I mean, obviously, better Gradle adoption is probably better for the Groovy community as a whole. Even if people are looking at that Kotlin DSL, there's still millions of Gradle build files out there written with a Groovy DSL. But I just don't know how well this is going to work, and I'm willing to be surprised. I mean, I hope that it turns out to be beautiful, and I don't get the feeling though that they're real close either. I think it's going to take a little while before this turns out to be a great contribution. Now, on the other hand, there was I didn't put it in the show notes, but Gradle has a newsletter too, and I received their most recent newsletter earlier this week, and they are also hiring. So I don't know if anything's related to Kotlin, but they're definitely hiring. So that's another place where they're doing well enough to consider expanding and bringing in more staff. So hopefully, I mean, I do wish them the best. I'd love for them to happen, but I just I think we're going to be in a watch and wait and see mode over the next couple of months.
Yeah. And JetBrains issued their developer survey results.
Right.
And I looked through it, and I saw obviously the uptake of Kotlin as the language that people are curious about, but I don't remember seeing a build tools landscape there.
It wasn't obvious. You had
maybe
to
I
go
missed
to
it.
the section on the tools, and I'm trying to find it now,
Okay, that's right.
but I did see somebody tweet about it, and there's a growth in Gradle, but
Okay.
the problem is that Maven is still way more entrenched than I would have expected. I mean, I get the sense that some appallingly high percentage of enterprise companies still are locked into Maven just because that's what they have and that's what they've been using, and they know all that, and they don't necessarily want to change. But Gradle is still growing. It's just not growing at an explosive pace, but it is growing. At least that's the sense I get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll have to see if I can find where the data actually was. So I'm sure somebody will go ahead and look through that. But as you say, that was the overall JetBrains report on the state of the developer ecosystem. Groovy, by the way, had still grown a little bit, not a lot. It was much smaller than their Kotlin growth, but hey, we're talking JetBrains. I mean, after all, if you're involved in Kotlin at all, you're going to take their developer survey, right?
Oh no, absolutely. There is the survey is biased towards Kotlin, and it's not that it's biased on purpose or we would blame
bias.
someone on it. It's just selection bias, which is natural, and that's fine. Saying that the survey, I think we should add it to the show notes, is not directly Groovy related, but I think it's very important for every engineer to take a look and see if there is something.
Yeah, no harm doing that. I'm sure we can.
So yeah, I tried the DevOps part of the report, and it wasn't that.
Really?
So
somebody tweeted about it, so it's got to be in there somewhere.
No, it's here. It's just kind of a weird name. So CI/CD, it's not DevOps tool for some reason.
Well, you know, we do have a Groovy podcast Twitter feed if you want to post something in there once you find it, assuming you do.
Yeah, I will. So here is the issue tracking, Jira and GitHub. No, it's not here. Well, you know what? I have no idea where it is.
Well, we do know a couple people over at JetBrains. We could send an email to Trisha or something and find out where it is. Although the other thing I was going to mention when I brought up SDK Manager, and again, shout out to Marco for all the work he does on that. That's such a major contribution to the community, and he deserves all the accolades he could possibly get. I wish he'd set up some kind of if not a Kickstarter, then some kind of Patreon or something to help support the effort. But at any rate, the other big announcement.
Talking about monetization of SDK Man, so the new side have the enterprise option. That should provide teams in disconnected environments way to install those tools. First of all, I think it's a genius idea, and second, I really hope it will pick up well, and Marco will be incentivized for all his great work.
Oh, I missed that. Okay, good to know. But also, of course, the other thing that's now available under SDK Man is Micronaut. So, of course, they did the big announcement at GreatConf. Now, the announcement, of course, it's still not 1.0, but it's 1.0.0 milestone 1 was not only released, and they also put the source on GitHub as well. So a few people wrote some blog posts trying it out. Jeff Brown did a presentation on it. He's doing presentations at various user groups all over the world. There'll be another presentation, and no doubt in GreatConf in Minneapolis. But I don't think 1.0 final is supposed to come out until the late fall or whatever. I think they say by the end of the year. But at least we're at a 1.0 milestone at this point.
Yeah, so we are being we share our excitement about Micronaut with you for the third episode in a row, I think. And and here's something I wanted to hear your opinion, and maybe listeners' opinion. They know where to find me. There are bunch of conferences coming up this fall, and one of my favorite is JokerCon in St. Petersburg. It is a Java conference, so I find hard time finding content to go and present there over the years. But I obviously thought about Micronaut as a good topic to share with the Java community, and I think that the most interesting format to do that is by comparison, doing some kind of a battle with existing framework, and show how Micronaut does the stuff people are used to. I would say probably the usual suspects or the immediate suspects will be comparing it with something like Grails or Redpack, but Anton Arkhipov brought up that maybe Spring Boot is a better candidate to be compared with.
Well, actually, there was a blog post recently, and I don't have the link handy, but there was a blog post very recently on what they call Java micro frameworks, and it compared 4 of them. 3 were none of the ones you mentioned, but one of them was Micronaut. They put the other 3 in there. Of course, everything's very preliminary. And in their other section, they mentioned Ratpack. They did not mention Grails at all, nor did they really mention Spring Boot. But then again, I wouldn't call Spring Boot or Grails necessarily micro frameworks. They have a perspective that lets you build something small, but they bring so much to the table that these other micro frameworks do not. You might want to take a look at that. So there was a blog post about it. It mentioned a couple of other very small ones. So yes, obviously there's a market for that discussion. The question is whether you want to commit to something before Micronaut goes 1.0, final. That's
well, I think for a kind of a talk, and it will just be probably showing steps for creating a basic web application and maybe a RESTful application. I think Micronaut is more than capable of doing it now. Really the only thing I battle with is what will be the alternative to show it to. Just and there are two goals in it. First, it really needs to be compatible, because the steps should be kind of in the same mindset. Because if it will be completely different, the comparison obviously won't work very well. And the second is I would love the other one to be very popular, so people will easily relate, and they will say, okay, this is how I do it, and there is nothing new in this part, and here is Micronaut, and this is something new.
Well, let me know what you decide to do with it, and we'll talk about it much more, especially as Micronaut becomes more mature. Back to what we were doing, there has not been a release on Grails that I've noticed. We're still on 3.3.5. It's amazing. We actually put in a new podcast before they released another version. So it's not that they're slow, it's that we are abnormally fast. How about that? But there have been a few things. There were a couple more Grails guides out there. One it was called Sending Email with Spock Spring, but it's really about sending emails with AWS SES, okay, and SendGrid from a Grails app and leveraging Spock Spring integration, verify interaction. Our friend Sergio Delamo wrote that one as usual. And then there was one on, was it Grails basic authentication, how to secure a Grails app using basic HTTP authentication scheme, which is not that common, but good to know how to do. So more Grails guides coming out. They always take pains, the OCI people do, to say that even though they're very excited about Micronaut, they're not forgetting about Grails. There are many people working on Grails. They're still very excited on Grails. They feel these two things are quite compatible. They solve different problems. Again, some of that's going to be wait and see, but I mean, they do care about it, and there is more going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing that I noticed related to Groovy, first of all, Guillaume Laforge tweeted that there were 19 million downloads for Groovy in the first quarter of this year, which is twice as many as over the same period last year. It's amazing how little publicity something like that gets, because you just would never hear that from people. If you ask developers, you know, how's Groovy doing, you never hear that, oh wow, they've doubled over the downloads this year over last.
So here is my take on this downloads metric. I think it's ridiculous.
No,
because because most of the downloads come from automatic tools. And Groovy particularly, even after a modularization effort that we had with Groovy 2, is still used in most cases just by downloading stuff like Groovy all.
Okay, so you think that's what it is?
In most of the applications, I'm pretty sure that this is more what it is. It's still very impressive. Obviously, it still says something, right? But I guess we have a hard time coming with a metric that makes sense when we measure popularity of the language. But I wonder if something this obviously it's not rigged, but obviously non how do I say it? I don't know how
we
to put
shouldn't read too much into it. That's all.
Yeah, but it's a good number. It's nice to have, to know. Does it say that Groovy doubled its popularity over the year? I don't think so. We don't have anything better, that's for sure. That we don't have, or
that's fine.
Maybe
I mean,
we have something that's slightly better, but all of them.
Right. Yeah. So in other words, it's good that it's happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean a lot by itself. Another thing that happened, though, is that now that 2.5.0 came out, our good friend Mr. Hockey is back. Hubert Klein-Icking, right? Posted a few new Groovy goodness posts, which is great. All running on 2.5. Did one on using string values and ranges, using Java 8's optional in a conditional context, and using range by method to set steps between numbers. So, hey, it's always welcome when we get some new posts from Mr. Hockey on anything. And clearly he's taken up the Groovy 2.5 version and is updating things to work with that.
I'm really glad to see his posts. As usual, those Groovy goodness and all others alike are the most useful in terms of return on investment, in terms of amount of text to the value that it brings with any other blog that I read.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily helpful. I totally agree with that. Now, speaking,
I mean, look at using. You would expect like a blog post for a page explaining what's optional is, what conditional context is, and then somewhere in an example. Here, there are literally 3 lines of text, 3 lines of code, and this is all you need to know.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and he does an extraordinarily good job, and as you say, he's extremely concise as well. So it's short, sweet, to the point, good examples. You know, it's always good when he starts contributing again. I'm just I hope he has time, you know, to do it. Another thing that happened in Groovy, which again I had no idea was coming, I've been hoping for this, is that they've they've now added a bunch of extension methods and overloaded operators for the java.time package. I mean, we don't have to struggle with date and calendar anymore. Groovy made those much easier with adding some overloaded operators, plus, minus, multiply, etc. Now they've added a whole bunch of stuff directly to the Java 8, date and time module inside of well, they added the Groovy stuff for that. And I saw an article. I put a link there to the one in D Zone, and it's quite extensive. It actually has a whole lot of stuff. Now, we talked about a library for that a few months ago, but now apparently they've added it directly to these changes have been added directly to the language. I didn't even know that was coming. Did you?
No, I didn't. But as opposite to the old calendar and Java util date, this is less critical. This is more like a syntactic sugar. It's a very nice syntactic sugar. Absolutely, we will take Groovy syntax over Java syntax at any day.
Mhm.
But if it was with the old Java date API, Java util date, and Java util calendar, it was almost impossible to use without Groovy additions.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
With what Stephen Colburn did with Java X date, it's actually you can do a meaningful and productive work with Java as it was. Although, of course, the Groovy syntactic sugar is much nicer.
No, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, the Java 8, it's just Jota time with the serial numbers filed off. They just rewrote a version and added it to Java 8 and the Java.time package, and therefore it has literally developer years of experience, and it is practical and useful. It's nice to see Groovy, though, having these additions, because it's just one more thing to show that Groovy is working with the most up-to-date versions and handling everything properly. But yeah, it's just syntactic sugar, as you pointed out. One more thing is that after GreatConf, there was an interview with Guillaume Laforge and Graham Roche. I followed the link on that interview, which I put into the show notes. And let's see, where was it? I actually ran it through Google Translate because it's in Dutch. So you could just imagine how entertaining that is. So at any rate, there's a link in there. It's got a picture of Guillaume, looking like Superman, holding his arms up, and we've got one with Graham looking like he normally does, like a pirate,
and you actually the link that you posted is already a link to translation.
No. I posted the original link. When I opened that link, my browser immediately said, "Oh, you want to translate this?" And I said, "Oh yeah." I mean, I can't do much with it, but the illustration was from good old.
I'm
Soren,
pretty sure the link is the link to the translation, though.
Really? I didn't mean to do that. If we want to fix that, we can.
Okay. No, I mean, it's fine. It's in English. People can understand it.
Yeah, but I shouldn't assume. I mean, we don't have a lot of listeners, but they're everywhere, right? I mean, we can't just assume that they're. Well, I suppose if they're working with Groovy, they must be at least comfortable with English, I guess.
That's my point.
At any rate, when you go to that link, even if the translated version, it shows you what the original is as well, in case you want to.
That's for sure. That's okay. For sure. So if you are the listener who speaks Dutch, there is a way to get back.
Yeah. So Soren will let us know, right?
Yeah.
That's Soren Benglasius, of course. What was the other one? Oh, Guillaume also had a blog post. Of course, Guillaume works for Google these days, and of course, one of the hot topics at Google is machine learning as part of artificial intelligence. And he wrote a blog post on doing vision recognition with a Groovy twist, so that he was able to use their machine learning API.
I have to give it to. Sorry.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I wanted to thank Guillaume to stick with Groovy. So in the beginning, it was obvious that he will kind of take his Groovy agenda with him to Google, but he doesn't let go. And when he speaks about stuff that he actually is paid to speak about and blog about the stuff that he's paid to blog about, there is always Groovy on his mind. The examples will be with Groovy. There will be some Groovy twist, as he put it in the name, and that's great. And I personally really appreciate it, because I would imagine it would be so much easier for him just concentrate on the Groovy part and not not forcing Groovy on it. So the fact that he does it, it's not a taken for granted. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, these the APIs, of course, are running on Google's cloud platform, and I assume they are presumably Java APIs or something like that. And he's just, of course, driving them with Groovy and does facial recognition and landmark detection and image attributes and all this, brand and logo detection, OCR stuff. I mean, that's great, and as you say, he hasn't forgotten where he comes from, and he remembers the rest of us. And I appreciate him making these things available to our community at large. I think that's all the major stuff I had. You, of course, still have that developer advocate job open, or did you bring somebody in at Shaper?
Yeah, no, it's there are a couple of things. So first of all, it's a long play. I look for extraordinary people that are not easy to find, and then they realize they need to work with me.
Yes,
Kind of, it's kind of mission impossible.
that's a
Uh,
tough Venn diagram. Yes, I get
right,
that. Right.
right. But eventually, I will manage to fool someone into believing that I'm nice.
Well, we should mention the other major bit of tech news, even though it doesn't affect us directly. It's something that is hot, and I imagine you have a hot take because I mean you have a hot take on everything, and that, of course, being the Microsoft acquisition of GitHub for what was
Absolutely.
it, $7.5 billion?
Yeah. It's seven
Yeah.
and a half. Yeah, 7.5 Instagrams.
I mean, hey, like I said, I'd be more than happy to sell my company to Microsoft for half that. I mean, I don't care. Oh my goodness. So what's your take? Are you going to wait and see? Are you happy with GitHub? You think this is going to be a good acquisition? You think this is good for the community?
I am I am happy. I
Okay.
think that's great. I think first of all, Microsoft is a completely different beast those years, and they have proved that for many years by now that they completely changed, and there is nothing to be afraid of. And although I love GitHub, I have a lot of criticism on the way they used to do product management, how features were prioritized and released, if at all, and how other features were abandoned just because no one cared about it. So I'm really happy with this move because I expect Microsoft to manage GitHub better than it was before. So I'm really looking forward to good things out of it.
Well, I certainly agree that they have made enormous strides in welcoming the open source community, that they have relaxed a lot of the business practices that scared everybody away long ago, everything, the whole adopt and revise and extinguish approach that actually companies like Apple are doing more of these days than Microsoft. So yes, what scares me, or what actually I wouldn't say scares, the area that I worry about is you see what they did to Skype. You know what I mean? You see that what they've done to previous acquisitions, even with the newer company, Skype has gone from something that was actually a very popular hot product, and they pretty much destroyed it. I mean, it's almost unusable at this point. And that makes me nervous. It's like, well, wow, I hope they don't do that to GitHub. Now, of course, the purpose in acquiring GitHub was to give them an avenue to reach developers, and they're going to have to stay developer friendly. And that's what we'll wait and see. So again, it's way too early to make a judgment. I'm certainly not planning to port any of my stuff over to GitLab or whatever yet, but
Yeah.
but
Well,
we'll see.
so my take on Skype that it was doomed before the acquisition. So for me, Skype has flows which are has nothing to do with Microsoft's additions or something, and I of course have zero knowledge of why they did what they did with Skype, but I would say that was a Hail Mary trying to save this product in face of obviously superior competition like Zoom US and Blue Jeans and a lot of good video conferences platforms which provided much better technical solution in terms of better quality over less bandwidth and less computing power than Skype did. Again, I don't know, that is just my take of why they tried to change everything so drastically, and the fact that they didn't hit, and the fact that the users didn't like their change doesn't necessarily mean that this is what takes Skype to the ground. I think that
Okay,
what takes Skype to the ground is better alternatives.
well, okay. So hopefully GitHub will be a completely independent operation, and they're spending an awful lot of money for it, and we'll see how that plays. Of course, that's a big thing to me because I knew a couple people at Pivotal when they went public. So of course I kept giving them a hard time, wondering whether their compensation was in the millions or tens of millions. I do know at least one person still working at GitHub, so I imagine he'll be in that same boat. If JFrog winds up going public, you gotta let me in on that IPO, man. I mean, we got to do something. Otherwise, how am I ever gonna, get this big, huge reward at the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there?
All right, right. So I'll do my best to remember
Yeah.
my friends after I become rich and famous. Well, I am already famous on this podcast, but at least rich. And yeah, one more thing about GitHub. Another thing that I'm really, really looking forward is amazing integration with Visual Studio Code. I don't know about you, but I completely switched to Visual Studio Code as my lightweight code editor,
Wow.
not to be
Okay.
confused with IDE. Not to be confused with IDE, but I used to use Atom, and before that, I used to use Sublime. And on Windows days, I used to use, I don't even remember, Text Edit Plus or something.
Right.
So
Right.
this kind of tool, and Visual Studio Code is just being amazing. And and
Huh.
and now with even better integration with GitHub, I expect great things to happen. So I am very excited.
I have heard a lot of people really like that product. I have not yet tried it. I'm going to have to do that. So, because I still use Atom when I'm doing ASCII doc most of the time, and a few other things.
Yeah. So that's a very easy switch. They look and feel very familiar, and
Hmm.
Visual Studio Code is just more code centric than Atom. So
I
I
guess it was
really, really recommend it.
just my bad experiences with Microsoft making me hesitate on that. Okay, I'll give it a try. Anything else that you wanted to bring up? Anything else we didn't talk about? I think that's everything that was in the notes.
Yeah. I think we're good, and maybe we can announce now. It's not a big of announcement, but anyway, we created, talking about GitHub. We created our own organization, Groovy Podcast, and we are migrating the show notes there. I don't know if it's even worth mentioning because it doesn't really matter. But yeah, we are organizational now.
Oh my goodness. I mean, what a moving up in the world here. That's just so formal. I mean, I've got this nice mic now, and we now have an organization at GitHub. I mean, what's next for us? We're actually going to have to do some real production values. No, that's not coming anytime
I'll tell
soon.
you. I'll tell you what's next for us. What's next for us is migrating from Google Hangouts to Zoom. I expect to beat you into it in the following episodes. And
Okay.
and you know what? Once we do that, I have to say that we will achieve the exact nirvana that I spoke about in my talk about podcasting.
Oh, and then we need a theme song.
Good
Absolutely.
software. Oh yeah, theme song. Yeah,
Yeah, we
that
need
will
a
be
theme
the last
song.
thing.
Right.
But didn't you promise something with your son?
Yeah, I've got some stuff ready. We just have to
Music.
figure out how to do it. Yeah, I mean, again, if we spent more time on this actual thing than just recording it, uh, have to spend an actual time. Well, okay, well, once we make the move to Zoom or whatever, yeah, I'll look into how we can take advantage of some of that nice little, copyright free music, royalty free, whatever that we can take advantage of.
And you know what? Then I think we're good, and the good in every from any direction.
Okay, well,
Website we have.
and
That's
another
that's very
shout
good.
out. I guess we should just do our shout outs. Thank you very much to No Fluff Just Stuff for hosting all of the podcasts as a web page link. So if you go to nofluffjuststuff.com/groovy podcast, you see all the links to all the YouTube videos and the sound files. The audio files are hosted on Podbean, although most people consume those via an RSS feed or some other podcasting tool, or podcast listener tool, something like that. Thank you to, again, Sergio Delamo has his what am I thinking of? The newsletter, the Groovy Calamari. You know,
which we
I didn't mention
which
that
we
this time.
shamelessly consume for our show notes.
Right, right. And I think that's everything. So good to see you, and hopefully we'll talk again relatively soon.
Great to see you. Bye bye.
Okay, take care.